Rain usually softened a battlefield, but that night it felt like punishment from the sky. Sheets of freezing water slammed into the earth so violently that the mud seemed to boil, turning trenches into drowning pits and rifles into brittle sculptures glazed with ice. Every drop cut like a shard of glass. Visibility crashed to almost nothing, just a gray blur where shapes flickered and vanished. Even the veterans, the men who had survived years of blood and terror, found themselves squinting through a haze so dense it felt alive. German snipers were the first to break. Their scopes fogged instantly, lenses frosting over no matter how many times they wiped them. Rifle bolts seized. Gloves froze to metal. Every attempt to fire felt like wrestling a weapon determined to die in their hands. One by one, they cursed, abandoned their positions, and crawled back from their nests with hands trembling violently. No human, they muttered, could shoot in weather like this. But the cracks kept coming. Sharp, clean, unmistakable. Each shot sliced through the storm with unnerving accuracy, striking helmets, snapping branches inches from German heads, pinning soldiers down with a precision that felt impossible. Officers barked orders into the rain, only to watch their men scatter in panic. How were the Canadians still firing? How were their rifles not frozen? How could anyone see through this torrent when even shadows had disappeared? Some Germans insisted the shots weren't real, echoes, tricks of thunder, the storm mocking them. Others whispered that the Canadians hunted by sound alone, that they fired without aiming, guided by instincts no European soldier possessed. Someone claimed he saw a silhouette standing completely still in the downpour, rain sliding off a figure that never flinched, never shifted, never missed. Fear spread faster than the storm. Something unnatural was happening, something they couldn't explain. And as the freezing rain carved rivers through the battlefield, one truth echoed through every trembling German rank. The weather had broken their army, yet the Canadians kept shooting. Freezing rain didn't fall, it attacked. It struck the landscape with a metallic hiss, coating every surface in a shimmering layer of ice that thickened by the minute. Optics fogged the moment a soldier breathed near them. Scopes froze shut like welded hinges. Men tried scraping lenses with trembling fingertips only to watch the frost return instantly, sealing their vision in a milky blur. A sniper without eyes was no sniper at all, and within minutes entire units found themselves blind, helpless, and terrified. Rifle bolts locked solid. Soldiers slammed their palms against them again and again, bruising their hands for nothing. Water seeped into firing chambers and turned to ice, jamming rounds in place. Ammunition pouches filled like buckets, cartridges swelling with moisture until they misfired or split. Uniforms stiffened, cloth turning into frozen armor that cracked whenever a soldier moved. Even breathing became a battle. Each inhale dragged cold needles deep into the lungs. Each exhale filled the air with ice crystals that stung their own skin. Both sides felt the storm's cruelty. Men slipped into trenches, falling hard onto ice-slick boards, dislocating shoulders and smashing rifles. Some crawled on hands and knees, not to hide from bullets, but to cling to the ground as wind threatened to sweep them off their feet. Hypothermia claimed the careless first. Soldiers who paused too long, shivered too violently, or sat down just for a moment. Their comrades found them minutes later, still upright, still gripping their rifles, already silent. Commanders tried to maintain order, but nature drowned their strategies. Maps turned to pulp. Radios shorted out. Runners stumbled through mud slick with freezing water, their messages smudged beyond recognition. The storm broke formations, scattered units, and humbled even elite divisions. This wasn't a clash of armies anymore. It was survival inside a storm that cared nothing for nations, ranks, or history. A storm so powerful it reshaped the battlefield more ruthlessly than any general ever could. And in the chaos it created, the Canadians found a way to endure, while others struggled simply to stay alive. Cold wasn't an obstacle in Canadian sniper training. It was the curriculum itself. Recruits learned early that the weather would not wait for them to adjust, and so their instructors refused to soften it. If sleet hammered the training fields, they trained in sleet. If fog rolled over the range, obscuring every silhouette, they were told to keep shooting until their instincts compensated. The first lesson was simple and cruel. If you waited for perfect conditions, You would never fire a single shot in a Canadian winter. They practiced managing fog lenses by anticipating the failure before it happened. Trainees learned to pull their scopes under their jackets between shots, letting body heat keep the glass just warm enough to stay clear. Instructors yelled when recruits breathed too close to the eyepiece. Do that in the field, and your own breath will blind you. Forcing them to master breath control so precise that even in freezing rain, no steam trail revealed their position. A rifle bolt was more than a mechanical part, it was a lifeline. Snipers memorized drills for keeping bolts warm, tucked beneath armpits, wrapped in wool patches, or pressed against bare skin in moments of desperation. In sub-zero temperatures, steel could freeze to flesh, but they learned to navigate that risk with the calm efficiency of men who had grown up handling metal tools in January blizzards. But the most unusual training happened when visibility dropped to near zero. Instructors would fire a single round into the forest and order the recruits to identify the source by sound alone. They learned to measure distance from the echo, to differentiate a branch snap from a boot step, to detect movement through the subtle shift of snow weight on frozen branches. In heavy fog, a target wasn't something you saw. It was something you sensed. Their upbringing gave them an edge no textbook could replicate. Most recruits had spent childhood winters hunting in storms that turned the world white, navigating woods so silent you could hear your own heartbeat through your scarf. They recognized the way cold changed sound, the way sleet softened footprints, the way freezing rain created its own rhythm. By the time they finished training, their instructors weren't just teaching them to fight in the cold. They were teaching them to fight with it, as if winter itself were an ally sharpening every shot they fired. Avery Holt had the kind of quiet presence that slipped into a room unnoticed, yet lingered long after he left. He grew up on an Alberta farm where storms arrived without warning, hammering the fields with sheets of freezing rain that turned the world into a shimmering cage of ice. While other boys stayed inside, Avery hunted, rain dripping from his cap, fingers stiff, breath sharp in the frigid air. Those were the days he felt most awake. His father used to say that Avery didn't just look at the land, he listened to it. Patience became his closest companion during trapping season. He could sit for hours behind a spruce thicket, unmoving, letting the storm swallow every sound while he waited for the slightest shift in the snow. He learned how ice carried vibrations, how a distant animal's steps traveled differently when the ground was half frozen, how even a rabbit could sound like a deer if you weren't paying attention. Winter sharpened him, not with violence, but with discipline. What shaped him even more were the long nights in the barn, repairing gear with fingers so cold they felt carved from stone. Ropes stiff with frost, tools that bit his skin, lantern fumes mixing with the metallic scent of ice. Avery worked through it all calmly, quietly. His mother joked he had winter in his bones, and she wasn't wrong. Cold never rattled him. It steadied him. Emotionally, he was gentle in ways war rarely tolerated. He spoke softly, observed everything, judged little. He noticed the way men's shoulders tightened before bad news, the way storms made veterans restless, the way silence held answers if you let it. That sensitivity, that almost painful awareness of the world, didn't make him fragile. It made him precise. When he enlisted as a sniper, officers were unsure what to make of him. He wasn't loud, aggressive, or eager for glory, but the first time they saw him remain perfectly still as freezing rain sheeted over his rifle, eyes unblinking behind a slick layer of ice, they understood. Avery Holt didn't fight against the cold. He fought through it, as if winter itself had taught him how to see. The first sign of German panic wasn't shouting, it was silence. Freezing rain hammered the trenches so violently that it drowned out everything except the sharp, unmistakable crack of Canadian rifles. German snipers pressed their faces to scopes that instantly fogged over, the lenses filmed with droplets that turned every shape into a blur. Attempts to wipe them only made things worse. Water smeared into a milky haze that erased the world beyond arm's reach. Some tried firing blind. Most didn't dare. Trigger assemblies froze into useless blocks of metal. Men slapped their rifles in frustration, cursed through clenched teeth, tried scraping ice off bolts already welded shut by the cold. Each movement sent needles of pain through their hands as wet gloves stiffened into icy shells. Their precision weapons, tools they depended on, tools they trusted, betrayed them one by one. A sniper could endure fear, hunger, even despair. But a rifle that refused to fire? That was enough to break a man. And above the storm's roar came the impossible. More Canadian shots, each one crisp, controlled, confident. Holt's unit fired with the calm rhythm of men insulated from the chaos, their rounds cutting through the downpour as if rain were nothing more than mist. Every impact, another helmet knocked back, another machine gun nest silenced, echoed through German lines like a taunt from the storm itself. Officers shouted orders that vanished instantly in the deafening rain. Some demanded counterfire, others screamed at snipers to wipe the damn lenses. One lieutenant tried to demonstrate, only for his finger to slip off a frozen trigger, sending a useless clatter of metal into the mud. The look on his face told the truth none of them wanted to say aloud. They had lost control of the weather, and with it the battle. Rumors spread between trenches, claims that the Canadians had waterproof rifles, special training, chemical-treated scopes. Anything to explain why they kept shooting when no German could. But the truth was far simpler and far more frightening. The Canadians weren't fighting the rain. They were fighting through it, and every German soldier knew he couldn't do the same. The freezing rain that crippled German lines became the Canadians' greatest ally, not because they were immune to it, but because they understood how to bend it, shape it, and hide inside it. Before the first shot was fired, Holt's unit moved with quiet efficiency, adjusting gear the way fishermen and hunters back home had done during storms that swallowed entire horizons. They wrapped their scopes in waxcloth, hand-treated back at camp with melted paraffin that repelled rain, like oil on water. When they lifted the fabric to aim, the glass beneath was clear, untouched by the storm that blinded their enemy. Triggers stiffened quickly in that kind of cold, but the Canadians warmed them using a trick as old as prairie winters, pressing the metal inside their coats, letting body heat seep into stubborn parts until the mechanism loosened. Some tucked frozen bolts under their arms for a minute at a time, counting breaths, refusing to let impatience ruin precision. Every motion was deliberate, rehearsed, learned through years of hunting elk or fox in sleet, where one mistake meant losing more than a shot. Their rifles never stayed waterlogged for long. Holt's unit moved with a rhythm almost ritualistic, tilting barrels downward for a heartbeat to let rain drain, tapping stocks lightly to shake off excess, then lifting again into firing position. Built-in pauses, woven into muscle memory, made them look unhurried even under fire. Germans mistook those pauses for hesitation. They didn't understand they were witnessing discipline in its purest form. Breathing, too, became a weapon. Holt inhaled through his nose, slow and measured, avoiding the plume of steam that could betray a sniper's hiding place. His exhale was brief, controlled, timed with each trigger squeeze, an invisible signature of patience that prevented fog from clouding his own sight. The rain masked sound hid movement, softened the world into a shifting gray curtain. For Canadians, that curtain was camouflage. For Germans, it was a wall. Silhouettes appeared clearly on the enemy side, dark figures outlined against lightning flashes and muzzle glows, bodies illuminated whenever they shifted or cursed or tried to wipe their scopes dry. Meanwhile, the Canadians disappeared deeper into the rain, their coats blending with the mud, their helmets vanishing beneath dripping branches. Each adaptation wasn't a miracle. It was knowledge forged long before the war. And in that storm, those small, quiet habits turned the Canadians into something the Germans couldn't comprehend, men the rain could not betray. The rain thickened until the battlefield dissolved into a trembling curtain of silver, a world where shapes melted and sound carried farther than sight. It struck the helmets of retreating Germans with a metallic hiss, turned the ground into a sucking mire that swallowed boots to the ankles, and hammered so violently against rifles that even raising them felt like lifting wet stones. Visibility shrank to mere meters. German officers shouted orders that vanished into the storm before reaching their own men. Believing no sniper could see, they fell back toward a cluster of stalled trucks sinking deeper into the mud. But Holt saw enough. Not with his eyes. Those were half blinded by water streaking down his lashes. but with all the small senses the prairie had sharpened in him long before war. He heard the uneven squelch of German boots dragging through mud, the frantic clatter of men trying to force frozen bolts open, the exasperated curses swallowed by wind. Each sound painted a clearer picture than any lens ever could. "We move," Holt whispered, rain running from his chin like melted ice. His team leaned in to hear, their faces ghostly behind dripping scarves. "Use the rhythm of the rain. They won't hear us." They advanced low across the sodden field, stepping between puddles instead of through them, spreading their weight, so the mud didn't betray them with sudden slurps. Lightning flashed somewhere behind the clouds, revealing blurry silhouettes. Germans huddled around a half-submerged truck, fighting to free it from the mire. Others crouched behind crates, helmets bowed, rifles pointed uselessly at the ground as water filled their chambers. Holt raised his hand. The team froze. Another flash of lightning, bright enough to carve the scene into a moment of clarity. He counted the silhouettes, noted their spacing, the angle of their heads, their helplessness. Then he exhaled. The Canadians fired in perfect unison, their shots cutting through the rain like thunder made of steel. Germans spun in confusion, slipping in mud, searching desperately for an enemy they believed blinded. Holt shifted positions immediately, sliding to a fresh spot beneath a sagging tree limb. His boots moved silently, rain masking the sound of his steps. Another volley, precise, staggered, untraceable. German panic rippled outward. A lieutenant screamed for his men to fall back, but the mud held them captive. Some tried to return fire, only to find their triggers frozen solid or their scopes filled with water. Others simply ducked low, blinded, terrified. Holt's unit closed the distance, using the storm as both shield and guide. Shots echoed in carefully timed bursts, each one placed by intuition refined through years of hunting in storms less forgiving than this one. Within minutes, the German formation collapsed, not from overwhelming force, but from the terrifying realization that their unseen enemy could see through chaos. They could barely breathe in. The rain had erased the battlefield. Holt had rewritten it. Some reports were written with shaking hands, ink blurred by rain, margins smudged where officers had wiped their palms before writing. Others were cold, official, stripped of emotion but unable to hide the truth threaded through every sentence. When these documents were declassified decades later, historians were stunned at the tone, not confident, not commanding, but bewildered, even afraid. One German captain began his report with a line that bordered on disbelief. The Canadians fired as if the storm were not real. He described the freezing rain hammering their rifles, soaking their scopes, and turning every trench into a ditch of sucking mud. Conditions that made precision shooting impossible by any conventional measure. Yet through that chaos, bullets still cut through the air with uncanny accuracy, hitting helmets, shattering crates, striking men who should have been invisible behind the watery blur. Another officer wrote that the snipers did not appear to aim, insisting that their shots came too quickly and too consistently to be the result of sight-based firing. He theorized, half serious, half desperate, that the Canadians were using a new Allied device capable of seeing through rain. High Command dismissed the idea, but the fear in his phrasing lingered between every line. Privates added their own whispers to the official accounts. One recalled seeing a Canadian silhouette through the storm, just a dark figure, barely human, rifle steady against the downpour. Another swore he heard Canadian shots timed with the thunder, as if the snipers used nature itself to mask their locations. A final testimony came from a wounded soldier who insisted he saw a Canadian reload in the rain without hesitation, water streaming from his barrel, yet the next shot still found its mark. Rumors spread. Allied magic, unnatural endurance, men born from the cold, soldiers who could hear through storms the way others listened through silence. None of it made sense, yet all of it felt true to those who survived. For the Germans caught in that freezing rain, one reality overshadowed all others. The storm blinded them, but the Canadians never missed. The rain had softened into a steady hiss, the kind that blurred edges and drowned distant sounds. When Holt spotted the shape, slumped beside a twisted tree. At first he thought it was debris, just another dark mass half sunk in mud. But the faint rise of breath, shallow and trembling, made him stop. A German sniper lay there, barely conscious, his uniform soaked through, his rifle buried somewhere beneath the sludge. Rain rolled off his helmet in thin streams, pooling around a face drained of color. Frost rimed the corner of his lashes. He was young, far too young to be dying in a foreign field. Holt's first instinct was caution. Snipers were trained to feign death, to lure rescuers close enough for a final shot. He steadied his breathing, watching the boy's hands. No movement, no weapon, just fingers curled inward, stiff and pale from cold. Holt took a step closer. The boy tried to lift his head, but only managed a soft, broken cough that dissolved into the rain. He wasn't pretending. He was freezing to death. Protocol was clear. Leave him. A wounded enemy was still an enemy. Saving him risked everything. His position, his team, the mission. But as Holt knelt beside the boy, something inside him shifted. The mud smelled of wet earth and iron. Cold seeped through his knees. The boy's eyes fluttered open for a heartbeat, revealing a look not of hatred, but fear, pure, human fear. Holt swallowed hard. He had spent years learning how to read wind, rain, silence, but nothing had prepared him for this. War demanded efficiency. Winter demanded ruthlessness. Yet the farm kid in him, the boy raised to pull lost animals out of snowdrifts and help neighbors before helping himself, refused to walk away. He hesitated, rain dripping from his cap, heartbeat loud enough to drown the storm. Then he slipped his arms beneath the boy's shoulders and lifted. The weight was fragile, shivering alive. Saving him could expose them both. Leaving him meant letting winter finish what bullets had not. Holt chose the risk, because in the rain, he could no longer see an enemy, only a life. The storm never truly ended. It only changed shape. One day it was a curtain of freezing rain, the next a mist that crawled into clothing and settled in bones. For the Canadians, the battlefield became a place where the real enemy wasn't always the German rifles ahead, but the cold relentlessly sinking into their bodies. Frostbite turned fingertips ghost white, then black. Trench foot softened skin until it peeled away in sheets. Men coughed until blood flecked their sleeves, pneumonia creeping through the ranks like an invisible hunter that never missed. Holt hid his own damage well. He always had. But every time he peeled off his mitts, he saw the truth written across his hands. The numbness spreading from knuckles to palms. The stiffness that made pulling a trigger feel like forcing movement into dead wood. Some nights, his fingers shook uncontrollably. He hid them under blankets, pretending he was simply cold, not breaking. The physical pain was only half the burden. The mental toll carved deeper. He heard every shot he fired long after the echo faded. Rain made the world feel smaller, more intimate, every kill too close, every silhouette too human. In the brief silence between storms, he saw the faces of the men he'd dropped through sheets of water. Their outlines burned into memory like wet shadows that refused to wash away. Sleep became a fragile thing. Some nights he jolted awake, convinced he heard footsteps in the rain. Other nights he lay staring at the canvas above him, wondering how much more of himself the storm would peel away. He never complained. He couldn't. Not when the others still looked to him. But inside, Holt knew the truth. The rain had taken pieces of him he would never get back. The sky darkened with the same grim promise the men had learned to fear. Another freezing rainstorm rolling in, heavy enough to turn the earth to sludge and steel to ice. German units braced for chaos, already struggling to keep their rifles functional, already shaken by days of shooting blind through water and fog. But for the Canadians, the storm meant something different. It meant cover. It meant silence. It meant advantage. As the first sheets of icy rain hammered the field, Holt felt the familiar sting against his cheeks, the cold threading into his collar. Around him, his unit tightened their grips, their breath steady, their movement sure. They advanced not in a rush, but in a calm, relentless stride. Men so accustomed to hardship that the storm felt like an old companion walking beside them. Ahead, the German line faltered almost instantly. Rifles jammed. Scopes clouded with fog the moment they were lifted. Machine gunners smashed their fists against frozen triggers, cursing as water pooled inside firing chambers. Officers tried shouting orders, but the storm swallowed their voices whole. One by one, positions crumbled, not from bullets, but from the sheer impossibility of fighting back. Holt raised his rifle, wiped rain from his eyelashes, and scanned the blur. Silhouettes shifted behind shattered crates and broken vehicles. He read the shapes, the gestures, the hesitations. Every movement made sense to him through the downpour. The rain no longer obscured. It revealed. His shot cracked through the storm with eerie precision, the sound echoing like something alive. His unit followed, firing in disciplined bursts, each shot carving a path forward. German resistance broke, folding in on itself like wet paper. Soldiers stumbled back, slipping in mud, abandoning weapons too soaked to function. Some fled. Others surrendered outright, dropping to their knees in the freezing deluge. And through it all, Holt's unit kept moving, steady, unshaken, storm-born. That day, they weren't just soldiers. They were the men who walked through the storm and didn't stop. Long after the mud dried and the rifles were stored in museum glass, the truth of those battles resurfaced, not in Allied memoirs, but in the quiet, yellowed pages of German archives. Buried between casualty reports and logistical failures were lines of raw astonishment, officers describing Canadian snipers who fired clean shots in storms that blinded entire regiments. One report admitted, almost grudgingly, that the enemy's rifles functioned when ours became useless iron. Another stated simply, they shot through rain no man could see through. These were not excuses. They were confessions. Decades later, historians piecing together the winter and spring offensives discovered something even more revealing. Forgotten training notebooks, smudged with oil and rainwater, detailed the unglamorous, meticulous techniques Canadian snipers had been taught. How to angle a scope against sleet, how to drain a rifle barrel without losing aim, how to breathe so evenly that no fog formed on glass. What had seemed like impossible endurance was, in truth, a lifetime of understanding weather, not as inconvenience, but as terrain. In interviews conducted long after the war, surviving Canadian snipers rarely boasted. Most shrugged and said the same quiet thing. We just knew the rain better than they did. It wasn't a claim of superiority, only familiarity, born from hunting seasons where storms came without warning, from farms where work continued whether sky split open or not, from childhoods shaped by mud, ice, and patience. For German officers, those skills became legend. For historians, they became a revelation. For the soldiers who lived it, they remained simple truths written into bone and memory. And in the end, the lesson carved into both archives and hearts was undeniable. The rain betrayed everyone, except those born to walk through it.